Chefs Without Restaurants, episode 108 with Erin Kanagy-Loux.
Both my grandparents on both my parents' side come from farming backgrounds. So my grandparents on my dad's side had, a huge, huge farm, but it was just for pleasure because that's what my grandfather grew up with. So they kept their, they had like a huge stone fruit orchard, and I loved picking the cherries with my grandmother, and we'd go make pie with them, and sitting there and picking the snap peas off of the vine, and I would just sit there and eat most of them as I'm picking them, and didn't have much for dinner because I ate it all. So it's like having those experiences of really knowing what food tastes like and where it comes from, and actually seeing where it comes from, and that you don't just go to the store and pick up milk. It's like we would go and milk the cows and take the cream top off the top of the tank for the cream every morning. For me, it was a very well-rounded way to kind of see how the food industry is and how people enjoy food and the different ways that it brings people together, and just the different flavor profiles in general. They're just so vastly different.
This is the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast with your host, Chris Spear. Each week, I'll be speaking with food entrepreneurs and people in the culinary industry. If you're interested in learning more about our organization dedicated to helping people build and grow their food businesses, look us up on the web at chefswithoutrestaurants.com and .org, and on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Chefs Without Restaurants. Now, enjoy the show. Welcome to the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast. I'm your host, Chris Spear. On the show, I have conversations with culinary entrepreneurs and people in the food and beverage industry who took a different route. They're caterers, research chefs, personal chefs, cookbook authors, food truckers, farmers, cottage bakers, and all sorts of culinary renegades. I myself fall into the personal chef category, as I started my own personal chef business, Perfect Little Bites, 11 years ago. And while I started working in kitchens in the early 90s, I've literally never worked in a restaurant. This week, our guest is Erin Kanagy-Loux. She's worked in various arms of the hospitality industry, most recently as the Executive Pastry Chef for Union Square Events and Reynard at the Wythe Hotel. She's a first-generation Japanese-American that grew up with a heavy sprinkle of Amish and Pennsylvania Dutch heritage. Her memories, experiences, and love of flavor has shaped the unique cultural background she draws her creative inspirations from. She's most recognized for her work in celebration and wedding cakes and has been featured in New York Magazine weddings. Erin competed in Valrhona Chocolate's first USA-hosted C3 competition and received the Bronze Press Prize. In addition to her technical skills, she's honed her skills as a coach and teacher through her experience as an instructor at the International Culinary Center, California Culinary Academy, and the Western Culinary Institute of Portland, Oregon. Past colleagues often refer to Erin as the MacGyver of Pastry, which has helped her in the ever-changing world of food. On the show, we discuss her upbringing and how it shaped her culinary style. We talk about her career path and her role as a culinary instructor, which now includes virtual instruction. Find out what her favorite ingredient is and how to work fish sauce into a dessert. And we'd love it if you supported the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast and community. There are a few ways to help. First, if you have a business or product, we're always looking for sponsors. You can also support our existing sponsors like Savory Jobs. If you shop on Amazon, we have our own affiliate link. Or be like cool kids Matt Collins and Justin Kana and consider joining our Patreon. If nothing else, it would be great if you subscribed to the show, rated it, and reviewed it. And maybe share your favorite episodes on social media. The links to all these things are in the show notes as usual. The support means everything to me. And now, here's a word from this week's sponsor, Savory Jobs. Did you know restaurants turn over employees 4 times faster than most businesses? What if somebody created an affordable and effective hiring solution for the restaurant industry? What if there were a job site that only focused on people looking for food service jobs? What if that site only cost $50 a year to advertise for every job your restaurant needed? Forget the big corporate sites like Indeed and Monster. Our sponsor, Savory Jobs, has a job site exclusively for restaurants. The best part is, Savory Jobs only charges $50 for an entire year, and you can post all the jobs you want. And for our loyal listeners, use the code SAVORY10 and get 10% off. That's SAVORY10. So go to savoryjobs.com and discover the job site that's shaking up the industry. And remember to use SAVORY10 for 10% off. And now, on with the show. Thanks so much, and have a great week. Hey, Erin, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for coming on.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad we could catch up. I can't wait to talk to you about all the delicious things that you're cooking and making and what you're up to these days.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. And yeah, it's been a new world.
I guess I probably knew about you. It's probably been like 6 or 7 years now. Oddly enough, I was going through my old photos. I couldn't find it today, but I think the first time I ever met you, you photobombed a photo I was taking at Star Chefs with Will Goldfarb. You know Will?
Yes, he's one of my good friends.
So it was this weird thing where like I was super excited to meet him and I wanted to take a picture and he randomly grabbed you off the side and threw you into the photo. And I don't think I knew who you were at the time. And I was like, who is this person? And why is he dragging her into our photos? So that's somewhere. And it just like stands out in my mind. And like years later, I've had way more conversations with you than him. And I just think it's pretty funny that that's kind of how I first, I guess, met you. I don't even know that I introduced myself, but.
He's so good at that. Just springing it on you.
Well, I've really come to love all the stuff you're doing. I mean, your food looks delicious. I unfortunately have not eaten much of your food, so I guess we'll have to fix that at some point.
Definitely. You probably had it at some Star Chef event, I'm sure.
I probably have. You've done some cooking there, right?
Yeah.
There's always so much going on. It's like 3 days of chaos and, just kind of running around, shoving a bunch of food and cocktails into your mouth. And then, you have to go back and look at the photos afterwards to kind of remember what you did.
That is my experience as well.
Well, I love to kind of start with backstories. You have an interesting upbringing. I think so much of it probably, all of our upbringings kind of bring us to where we are. So can you talk a little bit about where you were raised and your family and how that kind of relates to your food and cooking?
Yeah, it's definitely shaped who I am as a person, but specifically in the way that I think about food and everything I've experienced. I've been very lucky. So yeah, I was born in Japan. My parents were missionaries in Tokyo and adopted me from Kyushu, Japan, which is like the lower island. And, I grew up knowing all about Japanese food and Japanese culture. My mom was actually born in Tokyo, even though she's Caucasian. Her parents were missionaries as well. Backstory to that, my grandpa grew up Amish in, the middle of Pennsylvania, just between Harrisburg and State College in the valley there. They call it the Big Valley. So he grew up Amish and became a Mennonite missionary. Him and my grandmother spent many years in Japan being missionaries. And my mother was born in Tokyo and pretty much grew up most of all of her grade school years in Hokkaido, Japan, which is on the northern end. And so she's probably, the joke is that she's more Japanese than I am. And she always wish she could have had a citizenship, but so she kept my citizenship. I grew up, of course, knowing all the food, knowing all the language. I'm not so great at it anymore, but getting to know all the holidays as well. So we'd spend a lot of our summers there, as well as, every other year we'd go back for an extended period of time as she was a linguistics professor for university. So she took her students over and then we'd all go. And so being a professor as well, so she had to do a lot of research. So my sister and I ended up being her research subjects on how children learn languages. So, we got a lot of opportunities to be immersed in the culture and food, and just, the excitement over things like McDonald's and the things that we just we take for granted as being Americans, like whatever. But you know what, Japanese, like McDonald's is way better than it is here in the States. But, at the same time, you go from like this very, modern, fast paced, lots of lights and, amazing, just so much stuff happening all at once, almost overwhelming when you're in Japan, to then we go spend like opposite years with my grandparents in Amishville is what I called it, but in the Big Valley, because they moved back to where my grandfather grew up. And we'd go spend our summers, running through cornfields. And, I'd learned how to milk cows. I learned how to like quilt, which I was terrible at. I just kind of sat there just like bouncing because I needed to get up and move. But, like learning how to like bale hay and jump off hay bales and, catch all the kittens that are running around. And so it was kind of a really fun contrast between the two kind of worlds. But, what I really loved about the Amish side was, being able to have that opportunity to see how food is grown, being able to, both my grandparents on both my parents' side come from, farming backgrounds. So my grandparents on my dad's side had, a huge farm, but it was just for pleasure because that's what my grandfather grew up with. So they kept they had like a huge stone fruit orchard, and I loved picking the cherries with my grandmother, and we'd go make pie with them, and sitting there and picking the snap peas off of the vine, and I would just sit there and eat most of them as I'm picking them, and like didn't have much for dinner because I ate it all. So it's like having those experiences of like really knowing what food tastes like and where it comes from, and actually seeing where it comes from, and that like you don't just go to the store and pick up milk. It's like we would go and milk the cows and take the cream top off the top of the tank for the cream every morning. For me, it was a very like well-rounded way to kind of see how the food industry is and how people enjoy food and the different ways that it brings people together, and just the different flavor profiles in general. They're just so vastly different. But yeah, so I guess that's like the major things that shape me. And it's amazing to be able to know how to grind your own wheat to make your bread. And yeah, being able to watch those things happen and have people be like, what? That's what? But also being the kid that shows up to lunch with the lunchbox of onigiri that has like umeboshi inside and natto and like takuan and things like that. You're like, what are you eating? So yeah, it was fun. I learned a lot, and I had a lot of different, I didn't realize how diverse my experience was until obviously I got older.
When you were living with your grandparents, what was the availability of ingredients? I mean, did you just eat predominantly like Amish type foods? Like, could you find any Japanese ingredients or anything anywhere? Or was it a very split, like two very different lifestyles?
It's funny, like my grandparents, when they were missionaries in Japan, a lot of things that they would cook or bring back with them, they had to take a ship. Like my mom grew up taking a boat to Japan, and when they had to come back to the States, so it's like, that's a long trip. And oftentimes she had to do it by herself. And when she'd come back to Japan from the States, her parents would give her a list of things that she needed to bring back with her, staples that they couldn't find in Japan, and so vice versa. So when we would be going out to give them, we'd get a laundry list of things to bring from, we lived outside of Philadelphia. We had, Asian markets all over. So we had our list of stuff that we'd have to bring. But, they were about a half an hour from a larger grocery store that did have some of those, international flavors. We'd have very traditional, like Amish breakfast of like, scrapple and eggs, or, corn. We called it mush, but it's really just like cornmeal style, like lentil porridge. And then we'd set it. And the next day we'd do fried mush, which was my favorite. And, farm fresh eggs and things like that. And like white bean soups and stuff. But then we do like Japanese kare, or something, okonomiyaki. We'd like mix, because it'd be a lot of the same ingredients. You would just have to, like, the few things would be a slight difference. We'd bring the Japanese barbecue sauce for it, and it was like, but we'd use the farm fresh vegetables. So it's kind of like we threw it all in.
Well, that's a good blend. I mean, I have a lot of friends who grew up in that kind of area of the country, and they always talk about how they didn't have a lot of flavor in their foods. Like I still have friends to this day, my age, who I cook for, and they're really kind of overwhelmed sometimes by the food because they're used to a more plain kind of food. They had a wide variety of produce and proteins and stuff, but the spices, I think, is kind of overwhelming for people who predominantly grew up in that area and didn't really travel outside the region. But it sounds like you had a really good, well-stocked pantry at your house. And you said my favorite thing, scrapple. Like I want to be like a scrapple influencer. That's my goal. Like I want to put a whole cookbook together of scrapple recipes. I actually just dropped one yesterday. So something near and dear to my heart. I lived in Westchester, Pennsylvania for a while. So that was my first experience with so many of those foods. I'm a New England boy, grew up outside of Boston, but really loved my time in the Philly region. And, I went out to Lancaster all the time and just, really love a lot of the way of life, but also the cooking and the food. And it just seems like they've really connected to the roots of food.
It's amazing to see, it's a lot of hard work, but at the end of the day, like, it's so worth it. The flavors are amazing. And it's fun because you do see it now, like, everything has modernized to a degree. I mean, even though the Amish still are definitely the farthest from modernization, but, you will see, like, in the local, one of the places we love to go shop, it is run by Amish, but they're Amish that allow electricity and things like that. But even in there, like, you can now find like granted, many things are in bulk. But, there's like taco seasoning, and there's like, not necessarily like, I can't find yuzu, but you can find like shoyu, and you can find other flavor, and they have like the Japanese, the rice snacks. Like, it's cool. So they're branching out, and you can find some more, more international flavor profiles that maybe wouldn't have been there in the past. So,
how did you get on the path of cooking professionally?
I mean, like most people, it's kind of an accident. It started off when I was younger. I've always just been a bit headstrongly stubborn and independent. And, went vegan, went at a younger age, and decided like, okay, well, you can't make me this. I'm just going to figure out how to make it myself, and, make myself dinner. But it was also just like, I really loved cooking with my dad. And so just watching him, being able to cook along with him. And I was the one that would cut it, because that was something I really loved doing. So I always was cooking just in general, or baking with my dad or my family, or just a holiday coming up, whatever it might be. And then, I wanted to be independent at a younger age. So I got a job, and I was working and doing prep and learning how to do some pastries and things like that. And, eventually then I worked myself out of that job and ended up helping with somebody, a good friend of mine. I still go visit when I go home, but he opened a ramen shop in Eugene, Oregon. And, he was making his own noodles. And that was one of the first, that was like super crazy for Eugene, Oregon to have a Japanese guy come and decide to make his own fresh noodles and open this little shop. It's still open today, which is awesome. But I loved it. And I loved that, I love working in line. I love that intensity of, you got to get the orders out, and, that rush, and then that moment, and then cleaning everything up again. I always just leaned on it as something that I was good at, to be able to make money while I was doing something else. So I did that. So I was able to save up to, I finished high school early, and then I was living on my own, and then figuring out what I was going to do next. And so it was always that kind of thing. So what am I going to be able to do next? Okay, well, I always have cooking to lean on for work. Like, I know I'm good at it and I enjoy it, while I go to school for, printmaking, or I try to go to pre-med or whatever it was. And my parents finally just got tired of me, not ever getting a degree in anything, and spending tons of money on education and, learning a lot, but just never going to do anything with it. So I was like, well, how about I just go to culinary school? I know I can get my degree there. I know it'll be easy, and I'll finally have a degree. So that's kind of was the point at which, when I was actually sitting in anthropology class going, I'd rather be at work decorating cakes right now. This is ridiculous. Why am I working so hard at both things when I should just be doing this? So I guess I've always kind of been doing it professionally. It's always been my livelihood, but it wasn't until I decided to go to school that it was all right, this is how my actual career path, and I guess I'm going to figure this out. And then, I did sushi for a while, which I really enjoyed, breaking down fish. That was so fun, being able to take, it went from a portion of it, a tuna belly or tuna portion, to then, a quarter of a tuna to half of a tuna. And then I was allowed to learn how to butcher an eel and crazy things like that. And I worked my way up to manager, and that for me, that felt like a really amazing accomplishment, being trained by a very, very good Japanese sushi chef, along with the very talented American sushi chef. So that was fun for me. And then it's and I started school in culinary, but I hope no one takes offense to this, but I've met a lot of executive chefs that, if presented with the challenge of having to make a cake, maybe not their first thing that they would jump on or have a great success in. But if I was presented with needing to, take care of service for the night on both sides, I would have no problem doing that, or prep for that matter. So I love doing savory, and I love cooking, but I love the precision of pastry, and I love knowing how ingredients work. Again, my sister calls me the most responsible person ever, and that ties into all areas of my life. So I love rules. I really think they're important, and I like people to stay in their line, and I like to know what the rules are, because I'm also really like to know how I can manipulate them to work for me. So predominantly with pastry, it's I know how everything works. I know what they're supposed to do. And if I can't make this happen like this, or I don't have access to this, how do I achieve that texture, achieve this product, this end goal without having blank? So that scientific brain process that I love, and why kind of pastry was the way I went.
So is that important for you to kind of find some constraints that then you have to work around? Like, does that fuel your creativity?
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I love being presented with, here's this, like, what would you do with it? Like, that's really fun, but it's also like, that's way too open-ended. Like, you've got to give me some more guidelines. Do you want hot? Do you want it cold? Should it be sweet? Should it be savory? Then I kind of like, what do you need? But when it comes to like, I loved living in San Francisco, and like everyone's like, oh, it must have been so amazing to have like everything in season all the time and yada, 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 yada. And I'm like, yeah, it was great, but it's kind of boring. Like everybody's doing the same thing. Everybody doing the same thing pushes you to try to do something different, but it's like, it's kind of boring. So moving back to the East Coast, and like having seasons and having to get creative, and the dead of January when it's like not really apple season, and it's like citrus and like tropical fruit's great, but it's not really local. What do you do? Like, what else can you preserve? Can you ferment? What other ways can you prolong something that was, at its prime ripeness at one point? Or how can you get creative with what you do have and make something really incredible from that? So I love the oh no moments, but I also love that, like, here's your box, figure it out.
Yeah, that's where I have my most success. I like when customers have certain restrictions or something. Like, I do customized menus for people. And when people say they eat everything, that's overwhelming for me, because I start with this huge menu of like 400 things and I don't know where to go. And I'd almost rather them say like, I'm celiac and can't have gluten. You're like, oh, cool. I can eliminate like half of my menu and start from there. And then like, what are some of my favorite things that have gluten in them and how can I make them for them? It gives me a starting point, as opposed to like, just make whatever. I love everything. I don't even know where to start. And it just kind of blows my mind.
Well, it's a fun challenge to be like, oh, I'm gonna figure this out, and you're gonna love it. And I feel like you're gonna love it.
Yeah. Well, would you say you have a style? Like, if someone asked you, and I kind of hate those things when people say like, what's your specialty? But do you feel like you have a style?
For me, I try to work with as much, local, and what's in season is the most important for me. But being able to support the community around me is really important. But also, I guess aside from that, it's less is more. I really love the simplicity of food and being able to showcase the flavors for what they are. It doesn't necessarily, I mean, I've definitely gotten stuck in the world of like having to eliminate things on my plate. Like, is this really necessary? Like, what's the point of this? I know I really like this, but like, does it really need to be here too? It does, it's like in figuring out how to edit, because I really want whatever I'm trying to showcase that to shine. And I really, really love that. Really trying to constrain myself more and get creative and trying to figure out how to new flavors and balance them and highlight them without having to make it too overly handled. I don't know how you put that into a word.
Again, that's why I say like, I hate when people ask me like what my style is, because I do a little of everything, but figured I'd throw it out there anyway. Well, what are some of your favorite ingredients to work with? Do you have things that you put into as many dishes as possible?
Salt. I mean, for me, it's balance. It's like I love salt. It's balance. It's like it helps when people say something is bland. It's typically just under seasoned, and that goes for desserts or sweets as well. If something's bland, it's typically one note, and adding that little bit of salt is going to help carry your flavors that you have already. It's just, think about watermelon, a little bit of that salt in there really brings out that sweetness. It's also opening up, the senses on your tongue to be able to absorb and take in all more flavors too. It's like, that's what MSG, which is a salt, is technically doing. But it's also, who doesn't love that like salty sweet bar snack, right? That keeps you coming back for more. And, it doesn't need to be so salty where you taste it, but that little bit of salinity is going to make you salivate to keep coming back in. So salt is definitely one of those, and whatever form, whether it's actual like granules of salt, or it's in the form of like a fish sauce, or like a soy sauce, or a miso, something like that. That is like one of my number. And then some form of acid. Again, I really like balance, and I like to be able to. It doesn't need to taste sour or acidic, but having that little bit of acidity in the overall, flavor profile is really going to help elevate everything. Yeah, no, I think salt's the only thing that's really like an actual ingredient that I put in everything.
Have you found a way to work soy sauce and fish sauce into sweets?
Definitely. There's a way to do it where, it's kind of like, in my head goes, it's like taking an anchovy, and people are like, I hate anchovies, right? But you take them, you take the bones out, you wash it, and then it's more mild. They're able to get the saltiness, but it's not fishy so much anymore. It just has like, people are like, oh, it's like Caesar. And you're like, yeah, it's just an anchovy. You're able to mellow it, but it still carries kind of that, for me, it's still an umami-ness, but I don't really find it fishy, but I get that it's fishy for a lot of people, but it's still kind of like that umami-ness to things. But with fish sauce, definitely, like if you bring it down to where it is, a caramel, I usually cook it, I add a little bit of water and like add sugar and just slowly reduce it until it caramelizes. It becomes a very robust flavor profile. And it is that very like definition of like umami bomb and, that salty sweet that it is really lovely. And using that as like a dash in something can really help elevate your flavor profile. So like a little bit of that and with some like chocolate mousse is going to be really lovely. And you're not going to necessarily be like, whoa, that's fish sauce, right? But you're going to be like, oh, wow, that was something a little bit different. It has a little bit of depth to it. Like, I wonder what that was.
I feel like I'd have to keep that on the DL in some of my dishes for customers, because I do think that kind of stuff scares people. I have one of my favorite ingredients is a chili worm salt that Macienda and Jacobson Salt Company did, and I like it on desserts. So I do like one of my favorites is like a brown sugar cake with like a whipped ricotta and berries, and just like a little sprinkle of that, especially on top of the berries. But if I tell people there's like dried worms in there, they're gonna lose their shit. And it's like, how do I just put this into the dish, as long as I know you don't have an allergy to it, and just not make a big deal of it?
Call it protein salt.
Protein salt. I like that. I've done miso in buttercreams, and that's one of my favorite things. It goes really well. I make a banana cake. But, I'm not like a trained pastry chef, so I've had to figure out desserts on my own, which has been its own challenge because, I know a lot of personal chefs who just go to like a bakery or have someone make their stuff. But it's like, if you're paying me to do a dinner for you, I want to make everything. So like, what do I feel confident that I can make for my customers? So kind of figuring out my own pastry style as I go.
I love it. And I admire the people that are actually taking the time to be a true chef. And in my opinion, being able to if you can get creative on the savory side, like you have more than like a huge tool basket of, information to be able to then execute that on into a dessert of some sort for sure.
Well, and I'm big into reading. Like I have tons of cookbooks. I'm a big believer in weighing everything. I feel like I have that meticulous side of, the savory chefs forever were like, I don't weigh, I don't do any of that. I just like to cook by taste. It's like, I don't know. I kind of like the repeatability of I knew how many grams of whatever I put in this. And then next time, if it needs to be a little less, I can take it down by, 10 grams as opposed to just kind of guessing. That doesn't really make sense to me.
Funny enough, though, I still do. I've gotten better about how I actually document, but I approach pastry in that very way. I'm like, okay, it needs a little more, And then I get like, my sous chef being like, chef, how much did you put in there? So, I've tried to get better about like weighing out whatever is my like amount. And then knowing that was like 100 grams that I started off with, so that by the time I'm done adding to taste, I can go back and be like, oh, cool, I used like 47 grams. Great, we can write that down now. But yeah.
Well, some you can freestyle, but like this past week, I was making chocolate truffles and I had lost the recipe I had used before, and trying to get the right amount of like chocolate to liquid to filling. I had to make a couple batches. Like I made them like, it's too thick. And just like, I wish I had that recipe, because that's not one of those things where I can really say like, oh, it needs a pinch more liquid. It's like, I made these, they set up too hard. Like I need to back it out somewhere.
Writing things down is key.
Yeah. So what are you doing for work these days?
So I just started back teaching again. I taught for about a total of 10 years. And that was about 10 years ago that I stopped teaching. And, I love teaching so much. For me, it's just personally and like selfishly, I loved being able to really do a deep dive into ingredients and how things work and problem solving. Like I saw almost like anything that could go wrong, I saw go wrong, and figured, had to figure out how to what happened with it, how to fix it, if I can do anything to make it better, or like, wow, there's no coming back from that. It's like I really feel like you learn the most through fails. So through those 10 years of teaching, it really taught me how to get creative. And like everybody's talking about this pivot word. It's like I've been pivoting for the last 22 years of my career. Like I'm that young. So and a lot of people like, oh, those who teach can't do. But it's like for me, it was really honing my skill set and becoming, obviously helping me become a better teacher, but ultimately then just a better manager, and leader in general, because it's teaching me how to communicate and to really realize that the mistakes are a positive thing. And, we try not to repeat them, but, to take it in and that it's great. So I'm back teaching, which I love, but it's a totally different. So I'm teaching virtually now, which I thought was a joke. I kept seeing the ads come up on LinkedIn, and I was like, no, like it's somebody totally just messing with me. But I was like, well, I'd like to be doing something again. And as much as I'm enjoying doing cakes from home, like I don't have a walk-in or anywhere to store things, and I have like a home oven, which is kind of annoying. So I applied just for kicks, and I got, I went through the whole interview process, like, no, this is crazy. But yeah, so now I'm doing that, and I'm very impressed. I have seen some of the most amazing finished products, the better than I saw teaching in person. And, if any of my old students are hearing this, I apologize, but it's true. And, I'm still able to engage with the students, and I know who they are. And I was really concerned that I wasn't going to be able to actually like know who each student was and be able to actually specifically help them on their journey or whatever their path is. But it's been an amazing experience. And yeah, so I'm really happy to be back doing that. And it's fun because I've been making all these like fun supplemental videos for them, which has been a challenge. I learned a whole new skill set in the last like 3 months of learning how to edit on my phone, like videos, and like adding music and like all this craziness. So I'm still able to I feel like I'm actually teaching them too, but I'm actually able to still make things and be like, no, this is what I'm talking about. Like it's really hard to explain how you like type something that's going to be round and tall and say that way. So being able to make those videos are fun. But then and then I'm also doing, fun brand ambassadorship, which I really enjoy, and been able to work with a couple different companies and make some really fun things. And then of course cakes. Still doing lots of cakes.
So what kind of cakes are you doing? Are they all occasion? Are they wedding cakes, birthday cakes, that kind of stuff?
Usually occasion cakes, yes. Got 2 wedding cakes coming up, and then I've been doing like a lot of birthday and celebration.
So you're making your cakes at home. Is that what you're doing? You're using them there, and then then you don't have to have the overhead of having a huge commercial kitchen or any of that. If you're going to keep your business small, I guess that's where the challenge comes in, right? Because I have a lot of friends who do this as well. Well, I see you're also now on TikTok, so content creation I think is a whole new thing that people are really getting into. It's insane the amount of work people are putting into their videos and stuff at home. And I'm still trying to figure out how to best make videos and do video editing. I'm not quite ready for that, but it looks like you've, jumped right into that.
It's been a long journey waiting to happen, I guess. My sister she's TikTok famous, let's say. And she's been doing videos for, the last a year and a half or so, maybe 2 years, I'm not sure, but she's incredible at it. And she's been trying to get me to do videos forever. And so she's been really helping me on how do I do this? What do I do with this? Like, does this make sense? Is this good? What should I do? So I've got a really great guide.
Well, you mentioned brand ambassadorships. I think that's so important these days, right? Because there are some amazing opportunities to work with brands, but you kind of have to be able to do both photography and these days video for a lot of them. So it's a great opportunity for us to branch out, maybe make some money, get some cool product, but you have to be able to, communicate that stuff to the world. And it's something I wasn't ready for. And I've been practicing a little bit. I'm definitely not to the level of many of these people, but something I'm focusing on over the next couple months, years, I guess.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was approached about an opportunity a while ago, and it was just I was very surprised because it was like, wow, hey, would you like to do this? It's really challenging to find, a chef, let alone a pastry chef, that is comfortable in front of a camera. And I was really, to me, it just seems like it's like, I don't know, I felt like I was performing every day, but I mean, I taught for so long, so I always felt kind of like I was performing every day. And I don't know if that's kind of what made me feel more confident or comfortable in front of a camera. I still totally like, I always hate seeing myself or hearing myself whenever after I do these things, but it was surprising just because it's not something I had really thought about before. But yeah, I guess another thing where teaching has really impacted me in a really positive way by teaching at a younger age or younger in my career.
How did you learn to become a teacher? Like before you taught your very first class, was there any kind of warm up for that, or did you just kind of jump right into it?
So when I switched over to pastry after I basically finished all of the culinary program at school, I was finishing all my projects really early and really fast, and I was just done and I was bored. So then it became like, cool, well, like, why don't you do these things? And I'm like, okay, great. And I'd be done and I was bored. And then I was often like walking around and like, as I'm doing whatever. And, I'd have classmates being like, how did you do that? Like, and then so I just ended up like working with my peers and just like, this is how I did this. I don't know if this is what works for me. I've done this before, blah, blah, blah. And then it kind of funneled into, okay, Erin, leave other people alone. We're going to have you just start scaling out demos for the next few instructors for their next few classes. I'm like, okay, I'm done with that. Now what? And, I became really good friends with the dean of pastry and baking, who's still one of my really close friends. And he allowed me to basically TA. And so I TA'd for like the last maybe like something 4 or 6 months of my education. And for my externship, I had gotten some really amazing opportunities to go some really amazing places, but I actually chose to go do my externship at a community college and work with a dear old friend chef and teach. So that was, and it's vocational school. I actually got to spend a little time working at a high school too, which was really cool. And in their vocational, cooking program, which I thought was awesome. But yeah, and then from there, like when I got done with my externship, I was, brought like I wasn't even graduated yet, but I was hired as an instructor.
I enjoy teaching people. I think like in the context of running a kitchen, teaching my cooks and chefs, but I don't know that I could stand in front of a class and teach. I think it's a whole different thing because people say all the time, "Oh, you should get a job teaching." And I've gone on a couple interviews and I'm just like, I don't know, it just doesn't feel right to me. But I'm very appreciative for those who do. I mean, I went to culinary school and had some great instructors. I just don't know that I have it in me to do that.
Well, if you want to do it from a screen, I know how to help you there.
Yeah, that seems so weird, looking at culinary schools. And it's like, how do people go to culinary school via the internet these days? Does at some point like taste has to play into account, like the instructor can't taste the work of the students. So that makes it kind of hard.
Yeah. They've done a really great job of creating a really like interactive like tasting wheel to be able to decipher down to like those little hidden, umami things, an actual word for it and like a way to describe it. And like, are you tasting this? Does it taste more like this or this? And being able to like, well, it tastes more like this. And it's kind of fun because it's like a game, you're really like, oh, is it like this or this? I'm going to go choose your own adventure. But then it really kind of helps narrow down what you're tasting so that it is a little bit easier to have that, dialogue. But then, there is lots of interaction with the students in terms of when we're actually like live with them, whether we're like, it's not really even lecturing, we're providing an interactive deep dive on the material. And so if anybody's comes in like, it didn't have quite the flavor profile I wanted, what do I do? Being able to have those times to actually talk it out. But, at the caliber of student is really impressive because you have to be a self-starter. You have to want this. It's a lot of work on your own as like your own person to know the material and to, make sure you're covering everything that needs to be covered and finding all the research materials to bring everything together. And because of that I think that's also made this so much more rewarding. These people are going to school at the same time as like having a normal life and raising children or, working 2 jobs or, taking care of parents or whatever they're doing. And it's amazing that they find the time to read the textbook and to watch all the videos and either come to class or watch the archive of the class. And and do the production and submit their work. It's incredible. So.
Are you planning on doing this for a while? And I guess the follow-up is like, what are your goals for the future? I mean, do you have a path laid out of kind of where you want to be over the next few years?
Man, I keep getting asked that question, and I hope to teach for a while. I enjoy it's something that nobody ever teaches for the money. Let's say that much, right? That's not why we do this. I do this again because I would never want to move into another position. I don't want to move up. I don't want to become this. I really love working with the students aspect and being able to share my brain and everything that I've absorbed and learned. And, I don't want to be a gatekeeper in a kitchen. The amount of chefs that I've worked with that are like, oh, no, just you're doing it wrong, move. And then you're like, oh, well, can you tell me why? What can I do better? How can I improve on this? And they just shut down and they just do it. So I'm trying to help eliminate that concept and person. But then, aside from teaching, I have no idea. I hope I can have more opportunities doing a branding work. And, I love being given a product and being allowed to create whatever I want out of it and making it accessible for anyone to be able to recreate. I've been really enjoying doing these live cooking sessions. So I'm hoping to do some more of that. And I love doing things on camera, and it's been really fun. So I just recently had the opportunity to team up with Bon Appetit and Quaker Oats. And it was such a fun experience. And I got to meet a lot of really incredible people. And who knows? I'm up for any of it.
Being open to new experiences. I mean, I talk about this all the time with guests. The world is changing so quickly that the things that we end up doing are not even things you could have conceived of. Like I went to culinary school and graduated 20 years ago. Like most of what I'm doing now didn't even exist. Like the idea of being a personal chef didn't exist. Podcast didn't exist. Kind of like all this stuff, like working with brands. I'm sure there were some people, but it was probably like Emerald. Like how many people had like brand deals and worked with big companies? Like that was a rarity. And now all this stuff, it's just like you have to be open to the serendipity of, the way the world changes and new opportunities.
Definitely. And I'm loving it.
Well, who's someone you think everyone should know about that is maybe under the radar? I like to say, like, who's a badass that more people should know about?
Oh man, there are so many people. Allie Spars won at Winner Winner. She is incredible. She's tenacious, and she has just really done a beautiful job with the pastries there. And we got to work together. I got to have somebody help me out with my enormous tasting that I did for Units for Hospitality Group. I was in there for like 4 days, like made tons of food. But it was awesome that I was allowed to have somebody help me with the productions. And she came, we had never met before. And she had just moved here from Philadelphia, and we connected through a friend, and she came and just was a rock star. But then seeing like everything she's done since then has been amazing. She's definitely come into her own. She was a little nervous in the past about, being able to take on this role as, pastry chef, and she's doing amazing things with it. And then I have a old sous chef, Amber Fitzgerald, who's now out of Florida, Jacksonville, I believe. And she is a powerhouse. She is a powerhouse. That girl and production is amazing, but she's just started her own company, specializing in Jewish sweets. And some of the things I had never heard before that she had made for me, and it was just mind blowing. Like this tin can bread thing, I don't remember what it's called, but it was just so good. Anyways, she's producing and selling, and I don't know how she's keeping up with everything, but it's beautiful, so gorgeous, and I'm so proud of her for having this opportunity of a pandemic to be able to really like branch out and start working for herself. And another of one of my old cooks, Siobhan Spirits in Portland, Oregon, is doing the same. And her cakes, I'm so proud of her. I know she really wanted to learn more and do more with cakes. And, she's really, really just grown into her style, and her cakes are beautiful. I know they taste good, but they are gorgeous. And, she's really grown her business. And I'm so proud of her for being able to like keep up, especially in the like huge food scene of Portland. It's insane. So St. Francis is her business.
Awesome. Well, I don't know any of them, so I always love to have my guests share some love so that our listeners can find new people.
Well, that's why I love, Star Chefs doing the Rising Star and being able to see all over, the country who's doing what and think, oh, yeah, that sounds amazing. Love to go try that. Or, it's a great way to be able to be introduced to people doing really amazing things.
Oh yeah, I love the Rising Stars events. I'm sad there hasn't been one around here in a couple of
I
years, but
know.
I know there's been no ICC, none of that. I went to DC's done 2 Rising Stars events in the past, like 8 years or so, and those are my favorite events to go to.
They're super fun.
Well, then I guess similarly, who would you want to stage for or shadow just for a day? Like if you could go work for someone, who do you really admire?
David Kinch. David Kinch, hands down. I already asked him and he thought I was crazy.
I would love to try his food. I've never even tried his food. So that's on my list first, but he's so interesting. And I love his first book, but I also really like he's got the new book out, which is a little more accessible. The Manresa book is great, but I look at that and there's no one dish I'm going to make start to finish, just like kind of out of my capabilities. But, I really like his approach to cooking and food, and I find him super interesting.
USHG does this, has the Lexus Intersect up here in New York. And it's basically like an incubator, not incubator, it's a rotating like pop-up of chefs. And so currently it's David Kinch and Manresa. So when they were doing it, Friends and Family, my husband still works for me. We got to come in for Friends and Family. And while David was still here, and I don't fangirl about much, but I got to meet him and the food was amazing. And I was like, when can I come? And he's like, you're insane, but maybe one day.
And I always talk about resources. So what are some of your favorite culinary resources? Like, are there websites, cookbooks? Like, what do you just love to dive into?
I mean, number one, I always am looking at how baking works. It's just, in terms of like a glossary of, just detail into, I love Harold McGee as well, but this is a little bit more detailed specifically into ingredient functions together. So that is something I always love, just because what is this again? How does this do this? How, and it's not always I want to search for it on the internet because that's not always accurate. So how baking works is number one tops. And then I don't know, I like reading just whatever like on your Facebook feed when you look at the news things and you get the different things that apparently that it knows that you like, different articles from through Eater and then through New York Times. So it's just I like to see what kind of pops up, but I'll usually just go in and specifically research something, whether that's, back a couple of years ago, it was like, how do I ferment honey? Like, that sounds amazing. I just heard about that. That's a thing. Like, how can I do that? And my next thing is David Kinch had this fermented carrot sauce on one of his dishes. So I'm like, how do I do that? I want to figure out how to do that. So it's going to be deep dive into that. But in terms of I just love looking at Instagram and being inspired by either it's a shape of somebody's dish, whether it's sweet or savory. I'm like, wow, that looks really amazing. I wonder what that is, or reading about a really cool flavor profile and being like, wow, I wonder what I don't know what that ingredient is, or I don't know what that means, and then deep diving into what that. But yeah, I'm really bad. I'm not I don't have my go-tos. I kind of just like being surprised.
Well, that's not really bad. I'm bookmarking things on Instagram all the time. Like I just see something, techniques or something. Like Shola does a lot of really cool stuff that's crazy, and he'll put like a whole recipe in his thing. So it's like, and then every once in a while I have to go back and be like, oh yeah, he did this like really wild, whatever. Let me see if I can kind of like figure it out if he didn't put a recipe down there, or using it as a jumping off point to create something. Do you have anything you want to leave the listeners with before we get out of here today?
I'm constantly trying to figure out ways to thank my teachers for work and, the amount of dedication and patience that they have for this new screen thing. But just in general, educators are really incredible, and nobody does it again for the pay. It's because you love it and because you're passionate about it. So I really admire that, and just, thank your educator.
Yeah, that's great. Nobody gets into the food business for the pay. I mean, I guess some people do, but are we really in the food business for the pay? No. Oh, no. Well, that's great. Thanks so much.
Definitely not.
Thanks for taking the time to come on the show. I'm so glad we could catch up.
Thank you, Chris. It was great speaking with you, and I hope we get to see each other again soon.
I hope so. That would be great. And to all of our listeners, this has been Chris with the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast. As always, you can find us at chefswithoutrestaurants.com and .org and on all social media platforms. Thanks so much and have a great week. Thanks for listening to the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast. And if you're interested in being a guest on the show or sponsoring a show, please let us know. We can be reached at chefswithoutrestaurants@gmail.com. Thanks so much.